Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. We are so glad that you have chosen to join us today. Dr. Virginia, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just all the craziness of life is just, things just constantly going and happening, but we are doing well. I'm just so glad that we get a chance to talk today. I feel like for some reason it's been a while since we've actually talked.
It has. So, we recorded a lot in advance.
We did because we knew we had a lot going on the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. And so we had kind of done some things ahead of time. And so we are excited to be back together again today. Today is another one of those topics that we love. It's anytime we talk about educational principles, foundations of education, how kids learn, we get super geeky and we just really enjoy it. And so what we thought we would talk about today are some of the basic foundations of learning that kids need to have in place before they can even start to really understand what you're teaching them, before they're going to really be able to learn and understand the lesson. And so there are just some basic principles, basic things that need to be in place before learning can even happen. Mm-hmm. And if you've taken any education classes whatsoever, you are very familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you need kind of a reminder, it's the pyramid that you see in the textbooks that has the bottom level, which is the basic foundation, and then it builds on what things children need to be able to learn. And so for Maslow's hierarchy, it starts with physiological, because it starts with, you can't be hungry, you can't be tired, you can't be cold, those basic physiological needs that we have to have as human beings is sort of the basic foundation. And then he has safety, love and belonging, esteem, and then self-actualization. So what we're going to do today is we are going to take those basic hierarchy of needs from Maslow, but we're going to break them down a little bit more specifically and talk about some things that we can do in our classrooms, in our church setting, to make the environment such that children can learn more effectively. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we can do as leaders, as teachers in a Sunday school Bible study classroom that's going to help kids learn better. So today we'll just start with a topic and we'll just kind of chat through them and talk about them sort of in order to kind of follow Maslow's hierarchy, but not exactly. So it'll be kind of a little bit more generalization. But I think that the first thing that we have to talk about is the thing that's so hard for all of us to think about, and that's security. Kids need to feel safe to be able to learn. They need to know that their environment is safe. They need to know that they are in a place where they don't have to be nervous or worried. I always think about, like, if you are walking through a parking garage in the middle of the night, heading to your car when it's almost empty. Have you ever done that and then felt like, how do you feel when you do that? When you're walking
hyper aware,
you are. You just
you're
have
hypersensitive to everything around you.
You really are, because it's that sense of like it's kind of dark and there's nobody around, and the movies have made us think that there's always somebody lurking around a corner in a parking garage, and so it's one of those things where you just start to feel that nervousness build up in you. And so, you have that anxiety of just, am I in a safe place? Is this a safe thing that I'm doing? And that's what can happen when kids don't feel safe.
And I think too, observing our kids, and, there's a difference between like felt safety and physical safety, if that makes sense. Like you can have all the right safety and security procedures. You can have, you're inside this safe building. There's no inclement weather. Nothing's going on.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that a child feels safe.
Right.
And so I think being aware of, and there, we'll get into this even more, lots of ways to build trust and things like that. And just being aware of kids' body language and just cues about whether or not they feel comfortable and feel safe in your environment. Because it's easy for us to be like, well, why, like, little Jimmy, like, why would you be scared to go to church? Like, why would you, like, everything's safe here, we're fine.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that Jimmy feels safe in that environment.
Right. Because you have to think about experiences that kids have on a daily basis. There are a lot of kids, especially in preschool ministry, that if they are at home with their parents each day, if they don't go to a public preschool to a preschool, or they're not out a lot, then they aren't super familiar with other kids, and they're not familiar with other locations because they're very used to being home. And so those kids are going to have different needs than, say, the kids that maybe even come to your church preschool. And so they're in your building every single day because they're very familiar with it. And so we need to be very mindful of that. We need to be mindful too of parents being nervous. If parents are nervous, then the kids are going to be
pick up
nervous.
on it.
They do. And so we always used to try to make sure that I was really aware if there was a parent that was struggling with the separation, giving them options, kind of helping them process and helping them see what was, done in our classrooms to keep the kids safe. And always tried to do little things, like even occasionally, if I had a parent that was really struggling, I might take a picture of their child, once they've calmed down and started playing. And either text it
to them.
or take it to them to just say, see, I just wanted you to see Tommy is great and he's having a good time. And he was, just so that just sort of goes that extra mile to relieve their fears, but to not just kind of dismiss it because we're so used to it. We're so familiar. I've seen a lot of children's ministers that kind of say, oh, well, this is no big deal. Why are you so stressed about, and kind of just push it to the side when it can really be an issue because we want the kids to feel safe.
Absolutely.
And that comes along with some of the other things that we've talked about in other episodes where we have classrooms that are age appropriate and toys that are age appropriate. And we've made sure that the classrooms have safe equipment and not anything that would be too overwhelming or too scary for the kids. So that way, when they're in the classroom, they feel that sense of safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you actually led us straight into the next one, which the next one is trust. The kids need to be able to trust you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to learn from you because they need to know that what you say is true. And I think we've talked about this in other episodes before too, just talking about how that we want to make sure that everything we say to the kids for anything is going to be something honest and something true. And so that they can, if they believe everything we say, then they are also going to believe what we tell them about God and Jesus and love. And so we want to make sure that we are trustworthy. And so that means that we have to make sure that we're not saying things that the kids are going to find to be false. Like one of the things that I've heard a lot of teachers will say are things like, okay, if everybody can get their room cleaned up in 5 minutes, then we'll go outside to the playground. But it be super close to the end of the session. And I've had leaders say to me before, oh, they're not going to remember that I said that. It's no big deal. Oh, they're going to remember. They're not going to forget that. And so when they can't trust you for those little things, then it's going to be hard for them to trust you for the bigger things. So,
and I mean, and that's a biblical principle. I mean, God, wants to entrust us with small things first and then big things next. And so, I mean, that's a biblical principle of being trustworthy in the small things. And so that we can prove ourselves trustworthy in the big things as well. Yeah.
Right. Oh, for sure. And I think it's really funny too, because I'll never forget, I had one of the college students that came to teach in in a preschool classroom one time, and it was during the holidays. I don't know if it must have been like maybe our Christmas event or something, and he was doing the Bible story, but he was talking about the wise men coming, and he just had this panic of he just forgot. And instead of saying gold, frankincense, and myrrh, he just made up 3 things. Like he was like gold and, cinnamon and, like I can't remember exactly
he's
what
just
it
trying to like figure it out.
He just like made, and I was like, oh no, let's stop for a second. And he was like, oh, they're kindergartners. It doesn't matter. They don't know. And so it was one of those moments where I had this opportunity to explain, it's better for you to tell the kids you don't remember something or you don't know something than it is to just make up a story or just to say because you don't want to say you don't know. So you just sort of make up something and you think, but it's really, really important that we're very honest with the kids, and it's okay to say you don't know or you don't remember something. Or if they ask a question that's really hard, to say, that's a really hard question. I'm not sure. I'll have to find out that answer and get back to you.
Absolutely.
The next on this list of needs for children to be able to learn is acceptance. I think this is something that sometimes we don't process through enough as leaders. And a lot of it's because of our time. We just are rushed and we have a lot of kids and we're in a hurry. But it's really important that our kids feel accepted, that they feel like that this is, their church too, that they're, that this is their classroom, that this is they're in a place where people care for them no matter what. And sometimes as a teacher, that's really hard because you can have those kids that are really challenging. And so you can have these relationships with some of the kids where you feel like you're constantly negative, where you're constantly having to get onto them and
redirect.
And so you're just constantly, and we don't make sure we're taking the time to make them feel good about something. And so it's finding those opportunities where you can praise them for things that they are doing correctly, that you can, encourage them and say something, positive to them, say something, talk to them about something, from their school day or something that, that they like, or something that, ask them questions, let them know that you have these moments with them that are not just always correction, but are also accepting them for being there. And I think one of the ways that this comes too is that I remember when I was younger, and you would have like a little girl that would walk into the classroom and she'd be wearing like a really pretty dress, with all the little frills and the little hat that matches and all those kinds of things. And you just look at them and you go, oh, you look so pretty today. I love your dress. You look so pretty. But when you say that to one that's coming in, and then you have another child that comes in wearing a t-shirt and a pair of shorts and not necessarily having her hair just so perfect, and you don't say something to her, that automatically gives a child that feeling of, well, she was more accepted, more welcomed into the room than I was because she is dressed a certain way or she has certain qualities that made her, noticed. And so if we can make sure that we are making a big deal out of all the kids that walk into the room, no matter how they look or how they're dressed or how they behave, but showing them that they are accepted for who they are.
And I think if you can, even when we talk about challenging students, even with the most challenging students, if we can identify and verbally recognize to that child positive attributes about themselves and their behavior, even the most challenging child has something positive that we can point out to them.
Right.
Man, you are such a hard worker. I see that you are working on trying to build this tower and it keeps falling over and you are just working very hard on it.
Right.
Great job. Keep working hard. Thank you for being so kind. Thank you for, helping out Susie when she couldn't, reach this thing and you handed it to her. Thank you. And so looking for those positive attributes and naming them and valuing them to the child is so, so important. And even to go back to the whole comments on the girl who comes in the pretty dress, that even for her, like, is that all she is a pretty
Right.
dress?
Right.
Like she's like a clothes hanger,
Right.
not that we ever mean for it to come across that
No.
way,
No. A
but
lot of times it just comes out before we can think.
yeah,
It just does.
yeah,
Yes.
it does. But the more that we can recognize attributes about them and about their personality and about, that the actions they take or the decisions they make, the more that we can make it personal to them and who they are, the more accepted they will feel, and the more, I think, impactful our comments can be, because we're seeing them as a person, and we want these kids to feel seen as people, as individuals, who do bring something valuable to the table, even if they do take a lot of redirection.
Well, that's it. 'Cause it is, even the most challenging of our children are children of God, and we need to remember who they are and what God has called them to be. And we are not a school setting. We want them to learn, we want them to have fun,
Yes.
but we also want them to want to come to church.
Amen.
And so we have that fine line that we need to walk, where we want to make sure everyone is safe, and we want to make sure that everyone's respected and shown kindness, and that there are boundaries in our classroom. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But we also want to make sure that all of the children know that they are welcome. And I know that that can be really, really hard when it is a challenging child. But I think that that's the important thing that we can do for that child, more important than even necessarily some of the things that we're going to be teaching them about the Bible. It's just letting them know that church is a place that accepts them.
Yes.
No matter what.
Amen.
And so I think that's why that's so important. Well, and I think acceptance always leads us straight into the next, is that a child needs to feel loved.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I always try to remember, is that sometimes church is the only place where a child will feel loved. I mentioned before that for me as a kid, church was my happy place. It was my safe place. And it was the one place that I felt cared for and noticed. And so you have those opportunities with kids that maybe don't feel that sense of love anywhere else in their lives. They can feel that at church, and that can have a huge impact on them as they grow.
Amen.
Well, and I think we have opportunities to show children love in so many ways. A lot of it just comes from really just paying attention to them, really noticing them, letting them know that you see them and that you care about them, giving them a high five, encouraging them, taking time with them. Those kinds of things can show love.
Well, and that, leads me to think about the 5 love languages. Not that you have to set every child in your class down and do an inventory or anything like that, but just being cognizant that we have our own preferred ways of showing love. Children have their own preferred ways of receiving it. And so, I may not be a big words of affirmation person, but there are kids in your class who are. And so being intentional in still trying to, give words of affirmation, or just being intentional in the ways that we interact with kids, and being sensitive, especially to those who are maybe more difficult and who are more challenging. And, that behavior could just be evidence of, just like what you're saying, they're coming to church to be loved. And so being sensitive to that and just being aware of our kids.
It's true, because everyone shows love in different ways. And so for me, I am a hugger. It doesn't bother me if somebody, gives me a hug, if somebody puts their hand on my shoulder or something when they're talking to me. That type of thing doesn't typically bother me. But I know that there's a lot of people, like, for example, my husband is not a hugger. So if somebody at church comes up and wants to give him a hug, he tends to take a step back. Not because he's being rude, but just because that's just not his typical way
Right.
of showing affection.
Right.
And so to especially to people that he doesn't know very well. And so we just need to remember that our kids are very different. And some kids may really struggle if you're trying to give them a hug or if you want to put your arm around them or something like that. That may not be where they're comfortable. And we always want to make sure kids feel very safe. And so one of the things that I work really hard to do with kids is to do more fist bumps, more high fives, like letting the kid kind of lead in that way as to how they show affection or how that they choose to show affection. And so I always thought it was really cool. You see some videos on the internet of like classroom teachers that have that little list on
Like
the front of the
special.
classroom where
Yeah.
they can do a dance, they do a high five, or they can do a side
Yeah.
hug, or they can, so they let the kids choose like what they want
Right.
for that day to welcome them into the classroom. And I know we don't have time in church to do that kind of thing because we only have them for an hour. And so we can't spend a
Right.
lot of time with that. But the idea, I think, is really great. And the
Mhm.
idea of that you're letting the child lead. We never force a
Mhm.
child to hug. We never force a child
Right.
to sit on a lap or to do anything like that. It's better for us to just try to show that love in the ways that you're talking about, in words of affirmation, in
Mhm.
encouragement, in the way that you spend time with them, looking in their eyes when they're speaking. I
Getting
had
down on their
actually,
level.
yeah,
Kneel down or
I
sit down in
had
a chair. Mhm.
I had a mom one time get upset with me because one of the things that I always did was when the kids were coming into the classroom, I would get down. That was back in the
Mhm.
days when I could get down easier than I can now. But I would, bend down and I would look at the child's level and I would
Mhm.
say, "Good morning, Tommy. I'm so glad you're here today. Come on in." And then I would stand up and say good morning, to the parent.
Right.
And I
Right.
had a mom one time that says, "I think it's very rude that you speak to the child before you speak to me." And I said, "Actually, that's very intentional on my part because, you have all of these other places in church where people are going to be talking to you and noticing you and having conversations with you. But this is the one place where this is Tommy's space. Like this is where he gets
Mhm.
the attention." So I usually did my best to try to talk to the child first before I
Mhm.
talked to the parent, just because I wanted the child to feel special in just sort of a little, maybe even a knowing way that I
Mhm.
gave him my attention first, and then I
Mhm.
spoke to the parent.
Well,
And
that makes me feel better in a way because, I'm in the preschool world right now.
Mhm.
So, like, anytime people bring in a baby, I'm automatically like, "Oh, baby, hi, la, 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 la," and they're like, "Oh, hi, mom and dad."
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like, I kinda joke
exactly.
about it, but it's just like, I don't
No,
so that
that
makes me feel a little better about just my automatic,
yeah,
talking to babies before
right.
I talk to parents.
Well, if you think about it, especially for preschoolers, parents are
Yeah.
always talking to adults that are up
Huge.
here
Yeah.
talking to each other, and the child is just sort of down there waiting, waiting to
Yeah.
go someplace or waiting to be taken somewhere or waiting to be talked to. And so I just
Mhm.
always wanted the kids to feel like because they're my priority. I was
Yes.
their minister. Like I was
Yeah.
the person that was making that connection with them first. And so I wanted them to feel that acceptance from me, but that love from me, that they knew that they were
Amen.
important to me.
Amen.
And so it's those little things I think that we can do that can do that.
Well, and two, also going back to this is something that I've heard you say about when it comes to like physical affection. I
Mhm.
remember you've talked about like head, shoulders, arms.
Uh-huh.
Um, Whenever we do want to like show some sort of physical affection,
Right.
keeping it sort of in that zone.
Yeah.
So, like you said, fist bumps or
Right.
a side hug
Side
around
hug.
the shoulders. Yes, a pat on the head. That's a little condescending, but
And so, well, yeah, but it's again, there's moments of certain,
right,
like where things are appropriate or where things aren't, and where you can but it is that
right.
idea of wanting to make sure
Mhm.
that not only you are maintaining your
Yes.
boundaries for your own safety and for
Mhm.
anyone watching on, you want to
Yes,
make sure that
absolutely.
you are being as appropriate as you possibly can be. But
Mhm.
also, like I said, not making the kids feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Because I was never one of those moms that made my child hug or give somebody a kiss just because,
Yeah.
like I said, my husband is not super comfortable with that, and I thought, I never wanted to force her to feel like that she had to show that affection if she
Mm.
didn't feel like she wanted to show that affection.
Mhm.
And so it was always just something that was really mindful with me through my ministry too, was that you never know what kids
Absolutely.
are going through and what's happening. And so you want to just be super mindful. And I think that that's why, like for me to try to do my best to, if I want to, interact with a child, for me to get on their level, not for me
Yes.
to bring them up to mine. I
Yes.
tried not to put them on my lap. I tried not to pick them up. If
Amen.
I could keep from it, just because I wanted
Mhm.
them to have their personal space and I wanted
Mhm.
to find ways that I could interact with them in the
Mhm.
safest possible way for them
Absolutely.
and for the ministry. So,
Absolutely.
right. Well, the next one is the next two actually I always think is are kind of interesting because they sound like they're actually opposite kinds of things, but they actually are not. The next one we're going to talk about is freedom. And this is actually, I know, sounds strange in a classroom where you're kind of in control of everything that's going to happen.
Mhm.
You don't want kids just running around doing whatever they want to do. That's not what we were talking about
Mhm.
when we say freedom. But
Mhm.
it helps a child when they have the opportunity to make choices,
Yes.
then they feel a sense of being able to do things on their own
Mhm.
and that they have the ability to be able to do things on their own and they've had the ability to make some choices. And so that gives
Right.
them this sense of freedom where they're not being forced to do absolutely everything in the classroom,
Mhm.
but they're given the opportunity to pick and choose some things to do so that they have a sense of control and they have that
Mhm.
sense of, I have a little bit of freedom in this classroom. And part of that comes from being able to offer several different things to do in the classroom. Like, for
Mhm.
example, if you have a preschool setting where you have centers
Mhm.
and you have several different activities going on, then you can allow the child to choose certain activities to do. They can choose the rotation that they're going to. And that gives them that sense of freedom where they get to pick what they're going to do today. Are they going to go to the book center or are they going to go to the puzzles or are they going to go? So it does give them, I've always found that especially helpful with children that are challenging in the
Mhm.
classroom, that if you can give them options, they
Mhm.
feel a little bit more control and a little bit more
Mhm.
freedom.
Absolutely. Well, and it's giving them appropriate independence within the correct boundaries, and so it does. So giving them that little bit of independence and autonomy over their own decisions and over their own, what they want to do. So absolutely.
Right. So it's nice to be able to do that, to be able to have those opportunities for maybe a little bit of free play within what you have set out for them.
Yes.
It helps the kids don't even really realize that you're teaching them a lesson sometimes when you have
Yeah.
certain specific things out for free time
Yes.
that they can do so that you can still connect them to your Bible thought, that you can still connect them to something important from the lesson or to a Bible
Mhm.
verse, but they're actually having those options to be able to do that. And then that actually leads to the next thing that we go from freedom, we go into guidance.
Yes.
And kids do need guidance. You
Mhm.
can't have just free play for the entire classroom time.
Mhm.
Because if you do that, then they aren't making the biblical connections. They aren't
Mhm.
learning. They're
Right.
just playing. And we
Right.
only have this very limited amount of time with them. So we want to give them guidance.
Mhm.
Kids need a structure. They
Mhm.
need guidance. They feel safer when they have structure. And so they can focus more on learning when they have been given guidance and when they have been
Mhm.
given limits and they have parameters that they meet. It does help them to be able to learn better.
And I think too, it's like we as adults, we forget and take for granted that as kids, I mean, they have to learn everything.
Yes.
Everything about appropriate social interaction, everything about other people's expectations of you, other people's expectations of your behavior. And so I think it's easy for us as adults to forget that we at times may have to give kids a lot of guidance because they're still learning. They're still learning what it is to how to be a friend, how to be a student, how to sit in class, what teachers want or what, and so I think it's easy for us to forget that there's this whole plethora, this whole world of expectations of other people for our behavior that kids are learning.
Right.
And so, being intentional, one of the things that I do every single week is I always repeat our expectations, our classroom expectations every single week. And I mean, I would do this with elementary age children.
Right.
And I know that it can seem, especially to adults, so redundant and so repetitive, but that's how kids learn.
It is.
You may have visitors. We have visitors every week who it's their
Right.
first time to our church. And so how do they know what is expected at our church if I don't tell them?
Right.
And so, making those expectations clear and making those guidelines and giving that guidance, just because kids are still learning all of this stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
well, and that I think is a big thing you just mentioned when you talk about visitors coming and you're talking about kids that we don't know what backgrounds they come from. This may be the first time they've ever walked into a church in their entire lives. They may not know what's appropriate behavior for church and what is not. And even if they do come into our church setting often, we don't know what their home setting is like and what's allowed and what's not. Because I've had, parents before say things like, oh, it's okay for, our kids to do this at our house. We let them do that. And so I have to go back and say, I appreciate that. But because we have so many kids here, we can't throw our blocks, in class here. So, so we have to be a little bit more mindful. So, so Tommy's not going to be able to do that when he comes in this room, but he can do that at home whenever he, is at home. And so it's setting those guidelines. And I know, and it's funny because I know a lot of people think, well, that isn't, why would a parent, they really do. Some people's homes are very different than what your home might be. And so we have to remember that just because we would not have something in our home, a certain rule or something, that doesn't mean that everybody is like that. And we can't expect kids to automatically understand the difference between home and church. So having those basic rules, we keep our hands to ourselves, we don't yell at our friends, just some of these, basic classroom rules. Yep. And going over them, at the beginning of each class time, just to remind them, just to, have them help you tell it, have them, come up with a way to do it that's fun. But, going over those expectations every time is a really smart thing to be able to do. And it helps kids remember, oh yeah, I can't do that here. Like I have to, be reminded that I can't do this particular thing at church that I might do someplace else. And so, so that guidance is super important.
Absolutely.
And when we're talking about guidance too, and again, this one kind of leads us straight into the next one. Our next one is independence. And kids do need guidance, but they do need to have a sense of being able to do things on their own. I've always said, if I'm walking down a hallway and I see artwork that teachers have set outside the classroom, to be picked up after the session. And let's say that they were making fish, like they were drawing fish. And I see 8 perfectly shaped fish with the eyes exactly where they're supposed to go and the fins all going in the same direction. There is one thing I know when I see that. That is that the teacher has done
all that work.
Things. The teachers have done these crafts. They are the ones that have, they've made sure that the kids have done every little thing just right. And I always tell the teachers, as much as I love you, Tommy's mom doesn't want to put your fish on their refrigerator when she gets home.
Yeah.
She wants Tommy's fish that might be the wrong color with the eye in the wrong place and the fins turned the wrong direction. And that's okay. It's okay. It's okay if they color the grass blue and the sky green. It doesn't in the big picture because we are not their classroom school teacher. Right. We are, enjoying our time with them. We're teaching them about the love of God. We're teaching them our Bible stories, but we're letting them independently do activities on their own and to be able to finish their own piece of artwork in the way that they want to. And so, obviously there are certain things that you want to make sure that they're doing appropriately. We don't want them breaking crayons or doing, so when we say independence, we're not saying let them do whatever they want to do.
Right.
But what we are saying is that they do have the ability to make
Mhm.
choices about how they draw things or how they put things together or how they do things, so that they have that sense of independence, that they did it themselves, that they can say, I did this myself. And so that it can be, their artwork. And it's all right if, it's not spelled correctly. It's okay if it doesn't
Mhm.
look exactly like you thought that it would. Parents don't want the perfect picture. They want what their child has done. And so that's what's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is something, it's interesting because this is something I try to be intentional about in my parenting. But then also it spills over to working with kids at church, just being intentional to not like jump in and help them with things.
Right?
Let them decide that they want my help. So even if they are, we're building the Tower of Babel and they're struggling to build the block tower, I don't want to just jump in and like fix the base of the tower for them. I want
Right.
to let them have as much opportunity as possible to do this independently and be
Yes.
available whenever, if they do ask for help or if
Right.
they do need help. But, it's okay to let kids, struggle. It's okay to let kids exercise persistence and exercise hard work. Even if we see the solution, let them work on it, try it out. And then if they ask us for help, obviously we want to help them and we want to support them, but
Right.
just give them the opportunity to just try and experiment and kind of figure it out on their own. So
Right, because that's how we learn, right? When
yeah,
we do things on our
amen.
own, when we do things, even as adults, like I pick on my husband all the time because he's a computer guy and I am not a computer person. And so I will ask him often, like, can you show me, can you help me learn how to do something? Can you show me how to do this? And he's just like, sure. And he'll just kind of take it and do it. And I'm like, wait, no. I don't want you to do it. I want you to show me how to do it so that next time I can do it myself. And so
Yes.
that's that same kind of idea of like, helping kids. And I think that leads very well into the last point, which is accomplishment. We
Mhm.
want kids to have independence so that they can feel a sense of accomplishment when they
Mhm.
are working with how they're learning, because when they
Mhm.
feel that sense of accomplishment, they feel that pride, but they feel that confidence and they understand things
Yeah.
better. They
Like,
accept things better. They
I
know
can
that
do
they can
this.
do
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can learn this. I can do this. And so that's what makes having age appropriate activities
Mhm.
so very important, because
Yes.
like you said, you want them to try things on their own, and they might
Mhm.
need your help a little bit to be able to learn how to do something, but you don't want it to be something that they don't have the ability to do at
Yes.
all,
Yes.
because then there's going to be a real sense of frustration there.
Mhm.
There was a time when I experienced this myself at a conference. I was attending a conference, and the sweet conference leader had put these little puzzles together, and she divided us into groups, and she gave each one of us a puzzle, each group a puzzle, and we were supposed to work the puzzle, and then when the puzzle was completed, it had her points for the conference on it, so that way we were active and we were doing something. She wasn't just reading from a PowerPoint, she was giving us an activity to do, and it was a lot of fun. And so we were working together to do it. And we just could not get our puzzle together. Like we couldn't do it. And we kept trying and we kept trying.
Oh.
And so finally she just kind of looked and she went, oh, okay, you guys just don't worry about it. We're just going to move on. Cause obviously we needed to move on because she
Right.
needed to make her points, because and a conference is an hour long. And so she, just started talking, but my brain was
Yes.
really frustrated because I
Yes.
couldn't figure out why we couldn't work the puzzle. And so
Yes.
while she was talking, what I was doing?
You were working on the puzzle.
I was still fiddling with the puzzle because I had this feeling of frustration in me of
Yes.
like, why can I not figure this out? And so my brain was just on that one thing and I didn't hear it. Well, it turned out when she was putting her conference back together from the last time, she had put different puzzle pieces in different bags.
Yeah,
So
so they
we
got
actually
mixed up.
didn't have our puzzle. We had
Mhm.
half of our puzzle and half of another puzzle.
Oh,
They happened to
yeah.
be similar colors, so it looked like they were gonna fit together, but they
Oh,
actually didn't fit together. And so
yeah.
that was the reason why we couldn't do it. But the process in my brain was the same. Like it
Yeah.
made me kind of realize if you can't just tell a child, don't worry
Mhm.
about that, we're moving on,
Mm.
because our brains tend to want to complete.
We want to resolve it.
Yeah, we want to finish.
Mhm.
We want to feel successful at it and not get frustrated, because even if you can pull a child away from an activity that actually is not age appropriate so that they couldn't complete it, like if it was a puzzle
Mhm.
that was too difficult for them, even if you
Mhm.
are able to get their attention away and you're able to move them on to the next thing, they're still going to feel that
Yes.
frustration of not being able to complete something that you had originally told them they were going to be able to do. And so
Right.
that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we're using age appropriate material with the kids,
Mhm.
that they are using age appropriate, materials, activities, that the
Mhm.
work that you're giving them is age appropriate and that they can do. And that
Mhm.
also means that it might be their developmental level as well. So if you
Mhm.
have a child that's in second grade and you have several strong readers in there, but you have one child that's maybe not as strong of a reader, you don't want to point that out or pull that out. And so that's one of the
Right.
reasons, like, it doesn't matter if I'm working with second grade or if I'm working with sixth grade. I ask for volunteers to read.
Yes.
I never say, Virginia, will you read the
Mhm.
next verse? Not only because I don't necessarily know Virginia's reading level, but also I don't know Virginia's comfort level with reading out loud.
Mhm.
Plus, a lot of times verses have some very complicated words in them
Yeah.
and names in them. And so
Propitiation.
I know. You know, we just don't want to frustrate our
Mhm.
kids, and we want them to have a great feeling of accomplishment. And so if I have other kids that volunteer to read, then I let them read, and then I give
Mhm.
Virginia a different job to do. I may
Mhm.
ask her to go, pick up something from the other side of the room to bring to me, or I may ask her to write something on the board if I know that she likes to do that, because I've watched the kids and I kind of know the ones that like to do things and ones that like to do other things. But I
Mhm.
try really hard not to ever put them on the spot with something that they might not be able to do on their own,
Mhm.
because I don't ever want them to have that sense of embarrassment and frustration. I want them to
Mhm.
have that sense of, this is a place I can come and I can be myself, and I and I'm accepted for myself. Even if I
Right.
can't do something, I'm not going to be forced into doing something that I don't do well.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And again, it's not our job to teach them that. It's not our job to
Mhm.
teach them how to read. It's not our job to
Yeah.
help them, write. It's not
Amen.
our job to help them do those things, because we're their Sunday school, their Bible study teacher. We're not their classroom teacher.
Mhm.
And so it's our responsibility to make sure they feel that sense of accomplishment. Um, I think the thing that we just need to remember the most is that we want to make sure that our church is an environment that kids love to come
Mhm.
to.
Amen.
But we also want to make sure that while we have them, that they're learning about God, that they're learning about the Word of
Mhm.
God, that they are having time with the Bible, that they're having time with these
Mhm.
stories, because they're not going to get that necessarily anywhere else they're going to be for the rest of the week.
Mhm.
And so we want to make sure that we have a loving, accepting environment, but that we are actually purposefully teaching them something incredibly
Yes.
important. And there's
Yes.
a big balance to that, and it takes a lot of thought and time. But hopefully, thinking through some of these things that are just needed, the things that our kids need to be able to learn, will help you make a more successful classroom setting for your kids. Well, Dr. Virginia, this has been fun today. I love talking educational concepts with you. It's
Of course.
we always hit, like I said, all of our geeky points that we love, but we are just so grateful, friends, that you chose to take some time to spend with us today. And we hope that our information today was helpful to you and encouraging to you, because we are just trying to meet you where you are.
Mhm.
That is our sole and only purpose here. And so we would love to hear from you. Please like and subscribe and all the things. If you could let us know if there's certain topics that you would like to hear us discuss, we would love that very much, because we want to find the things that are going to be the most helpful for you. And we will be talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.